webinar. Again, my name is Nancy Martinez. I'm a sourcing specialist with the Strategic Services Group here with the Alliance. Now, before I dive into total cost of ownership, I want to review the pressures that we're experiencing in our profession, whether we like to or not. As pressures continue to contain costs, produce results, and increase transparency in our operations, it's vital for us to adopt the philosophies, methods, and processes that will create the greatest value for our organizations. So as the financial climates shift, we need to be able to evolve alongside. Doing what we've always done, even if we do it very well, is no longer acceptable. Not evolving makes our process feel more like a reactive transactional function instead of a strategic supply chain. So our role in purchasing can have a powerful impact to our organization's bottom line. Senior leadership continuously turn to supply chain to find ways to lower costs and maximize savings. One area where we can really create some value is understanding the true cost or total cost of the things that we're buying and over time. And what I mean by that is that if we have an accurate picture of total cost, we can begin to consider the total cost impact of our decisions, actualize short, long-term savings for our end users, and maximize our negotiation power. In the past, decisions were made by comparing nothing much more than purchase price, where the priority was to obtain the lowest purchase price as possible. We understand now that can provide us with a false victory because it doesn't include the cost over time for that asset. In today's business environment, we need to shift the focus from purchase price to understanding the total cost of the things that we're owning. This makes good sense when we consider that acquisition cost only accounts for 25 to 40% of the total cost of the things that we're buying. So as we start looking at the basic concepts of total cost of ownership, we need to begin evaluating our current process and begin to start challenging the things that we're due. If acquisition makes up only a small percentage of the things that we're buying, how much in the terms of dollars are we leaving at the negotiation table? And if we don't have an accurate picture, how can we truly capture our savings opportunity? So in this webinar, my objectives are to provide you with a basic concept of total cost of ownership, the elements that make it up, applying TCO to your purchasing process, and the benefits that come to your organization, and then some of the challenges that you can face with total cost of ownership. They are challenges, but I think if we're diligent and we're resourceful enough, we can definitely overcome these challenges, and I will definitely touch on that. And then at the very end, I'll have an opportunity for any questions and answers. So my main objective in going over TCO is to help you understand the concepts of TCO and when applied, how it serves as a tool to help you support your acquisition and planning and inform you and your stakeholders what you're going to pay out of pocket and keep your asset operating over its lifetime. So I looked at ISM because it's in line to our profession. And ISM defines TCO as a total cost of an item or system over its full life, including the cost of development, production, operation and maintenance, disposal, and replacement. A simple way of looking at that, it's the financial estimate of your direct and indirect cost. It also includes the cost of operating, maintaining that equipment or service over its lifetime, and then when you get to the end of life cycle, any disposal costs that are associated with it. So when you start looking at TCO, you'll find 100 different ways to define it. I included 2 additional definitions that I found helpful in understanding what TCO is. So one defines total cost of ownership as a purchasing tool and philosophy, while the other combines the life cycle cost effects with the acquisition price. Now, for the purposes of this webinar, I plan to incorporate all of these 3 definitions as I continue to explain what the elements are of TCO. So in continuing the definition of total cost, I want to address life cycle cost. So if we refer to the definition above, we would consider life cycle costs another cost driver of the TCO model. And so what cost drivers are any activity that causes or creates a cost. Life cycle cost is defined as that expense of using that item in its intended application over its entire lifetime period of expected use. So understanding the estimated life of your purchase, you can begin to quantify cost drivers of transitioning to new suppliers, operating, maintaining, disposal, and net salvage value, whether negative or positive, of an asset at the end of its life. So as buyers, only when we uncover all of the cost drivers can we really have a realistic picture of the lowest cost of ownership. TCO is typically carried out in financial terms. Using this approach, purchasers are encouraged to consider not just the acquisition of cost of a new capital, but also things like staff cost, training, transportation cost, operation cost, and disposal. Now, as public organizations, we have policies in place that govern the manner in which we acquire goods and services.
Go back to the slide. I'm not sure they can see the presentation. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Again, what I was stating about this is that we have policies in place that govern the manner in which we acquire goods and services. With communication increasing recently regarding transparency in our acquisitions, ultimately in supply chain, we're accountable for every dollar we spend and measured by every dollar we save. So Section 51.9335 identifies the quantitative and qualitative factors that guide us in determining what is best practice. While this is was associated to higher education, what I do want other organizations to understand that these are established based on industry best practices. So while TCO doesn't answer your non-cost factors, where it does assist you is when we look under Section B. Number one, it does help you with understanding, number one, the purchase price. Number four, the extent of which the goods and services meet the institution's needs. And number seven, the total long-term cost to the institution of acquiring the vendor's goods and services. So the TCO model provides you with good visibility into quantifying your lowest cost of ownership. When used at the beginning of your purchase process, it provides you with a great tool to analyze all of your cost drivers. Those are those activities that create cost, and make the most informed decisions when comparing suppliers, understanding the cost impact among alternative options or scenarios. So in the end, our efforts create value and minimize situations where we're overspending or wasting our organization's financial resources. And more importantly, it minimizes those financial surprises after we've acquired the asset. So the culture and accountability measures are changing for our profession. And it's important to, right now, be at the forefront, growing through implementing innovative and strategic methods. In our sourcing operations, again, TCO it's not a new model, but it does provide us with a comprehensive analysis of the real cost of our sourcing. TCO can be broken down into four primary elements. At the beginning of a sourcing project, there's a people investment, a front-end cost that can be a cost driver to include into your TCO analysis. So for example, one of the things that we do in the Strategic Services Group at the beginning of any sourcing event is we put together an evaluation team, or what we call subject matter experts, that we have perceived as having a skill or knowledge on a particular product or service. There is a loss of productivity cost for these team members when used at the initial planning process. While not everyone includes that pre-acquisition cost into your TCO model, where I would recommend its use is, when those large capital investments are being made, or situations where it's requiring months of research and planning, you're going to want to include that pre-acquisition cost because it is going to have an effect on your overall cost of ownership. Another example of pre-acquisition costs can include hiring consultants. So in some projects, it'll require you to hire someone to actually understand your current environment. And that cost is actually incurred before you even go out to market. Now, a real life example that happened to one of my team members that they experienced was through a purchase of an MRI machine. So once they went out to bid and purchased this MRI machine, once it was delivered, it was discovered that the only way you were going to get that MRI machine into the hospital was by putting a hole into the side of the building. That was going to have that hospital incur over $100,000 extra in cost just to get that machine into the building. That doesn't include the logistics of finding a crane that can handle the weight of an MRI machine to get it inside the hospital, but then you got to patch up that hole. And so what are the costs that you would incur prior to acquiring that MRI machine? So the second element is acquisition costs. Typically, these are your direct costs. This is your out-of-pocket expense that you're going to incur. Conversion costs includes a lot of hidden costs. These are, when we think about life cycle cost, this is the expense to keep your asset operating, any maintenance that's required, repairs, and downtime. And when I refer to downtime, there's two areas of cost that are associated to that. So there's downtime when you, let's say, implement a new solution. There's downtime of getting that current solution out of your clinic or institution, and the downtime to your staff of getting the new machine inside. The other expense with downtime is post-operation. So once you get that machine operating, what is it going to cost every time that machine goes down? So when we think about that MRI machine, when a machine goes down, what's the lost productivity as far as patient revenue? That's some downtime cost that we can associate and include in our conversion cost. The last element of TCO is disposal cost. So even when a product or service reaches the end of its usable life, it's still going to incur a cost to decommission that machine. Expenses incurred by disposal activities, and then any salvage value, whether positive or negative. So where you would gain some positive salvage value is if you're able to sell that machine aftermarket or through an auction. Where it's negative is when we think about that MRI machine. What's it going to cost us to decommission that machine once it comes to end of life? Are we going to have to put another hole into the building just to get it out and get a new solution in? So those are some of the costs you want to include for your element. So many of us are familiar with this concept, which is the iceberg concept. It's a very good illustration of our procurement process. So just like an iceberg, in procurement, the visible or the tip of the iceberg only encompasses your acquisition price or that out-of-pocket cost. The iceberg is a powerful metaphor in understanding TCO because it helps you understand that really when you're going out to procure something, only 20 to 40% is going to be captured under purchase price. Where we need to really be strategic is by focusing on those hidden costs that fall beneath the waterline, the ones that are going to incur 60 to 80% of your real cost. So those are the expenses that are going to impact your organization's bottom line. Anything from labor, training and education, downtime, productivity losses, maintenance, ordering, in-house support, those are some of the categories that you would see that would fall under hidden cost. Now, every procurement is different, so what needs to be included in your TCO model will vary. The goal is to develop a TCO model that accurately reflects the total expenses of the asset you're trying to buy. So to put this into perspective, If we look at acquisition of desktop computers, under a traditional approach, our focus would look only at the initial out-of-pocket cost. So that's looking at certain categories like hardware, software, installation, and freight. The focus would be to get the cheapest computer that you can find out in the market as part of your solution. On a traditional approach, it would make it seem that that would provide your lowest cost of ownership. But in stopping there, you would believe that, $1,200 you were able to find a solution and there would be no additional expenses. But what we know thus far is if when we look under a strategic approach and actually apply something like the TCO model, we start seeing those hidden costs that really are the drivers, the cost drivers to the purchases of desktop computers. So once we've implemented those hidden expenses, we really realize that under strategic approach, our solution is really going to cost us $1,500. So before, there are $300 that are not accounted for. And another thing to note under strategic approach is really what's going to be the cost driver that creates the most expense, and that's going to be maintenance. So the older your technology gets, the more it's going to cost to repair. So those are some of the things that you need to understand early on before you go out to make a solution or go out to purchase a solution that may not be the most cost effective. So we've gone over some of the basic concepts of TCO. What we can take away from this is that when through building best practices such as TCO into our purchasing model, we move away from looking at just acquisition cost. We understand the cost drivers that make up the things that we're buying, and we're able to determine the lowest cost of ownership and really understand the total cost impact of our purchasing decisions. Now I want to take us through applying this model into our sourcing operations. There are 4 major steps in the TCO process. And in order to apply the TCO model to your purchasing process, you must first understand your current environment, and that's understanding what your end user's needs are. The second step is to identify your cost drivers. And then once you've established what activities are going to create costs, is to calculate those financial estimates as your TCO analysis. And then at the very end of your TCO process would be to present your findings to senior leadership and end users. So to understand the TCO model and how it's applied, I'm going to take you through a hypothetical sourcing opportunity and incorporate the previously discussed elements of TCO as well as the process of analyzing total cost. So the parameters of this sourcing opportunity is a solution that's already been implemented. So in 2010, the university optimized their office printing by moving from desktop printers to multifunction printer services. The managed print services agreement is expiring. So using a TCO model, the question that we need to answer is which supplier provides the lowest cost of ownership for multifunction devices. So understanding your current state is the very first step of your TCO framework. It encompasses much of your research and planning that goes into a sourcing event. So as we start building our framework, we want to make sure that we are as informed as we can be, understanding the specs and industry terminology for multifunction devices and what your end user expectations are. So what I have here, very first bullet point is to define the requirements. Understanding what your end users require for multifunction devices. This could be anything from performance capabilities such as print speed, paper capacity, anywhere to technical capabilities such as wireless connectivity, memory capacity for large print jobs. And then important for hospitals and institutions are security requirements that we want to be sure that our solution secures any patient and student information. Another thing at the very stage of understanding your environment is to assess the life cycle. Do you currently have the latest and greatest technology? how efficient are your machines, and how often are they needing repairs. Those types of questions will kind of help you to find out, how long your life cycle will be for multifunction devices, and how long are you trying to procure these items. The last thing is to define the areas of cost to be included. And one thing that can really help you to understand your cost of your current environment is looking and reviewing your current spend. So while this doesn't have all the questions that you want to ask your end users, it does give you a starting point when it comes to multifunction devices. So in the sourcing opportunity, some of the things we want to know about our current state are volume rates. So how much paper are we currently using, so that we ensure that we have a solution that meets that need. And then understanding the machine capabilities. Initially, what did these machines cost us? What is the cost per page? What is toner going to cost, or what does it currently cost? And what is the utility cost that these multifunction devices produce? The last thing would be maintenance, understanding what the current cost is for repair, and then downtime cost. Other considerations, as I stated before, one of the things that we do here in Strategic Services Group is put together an evaluation team. And these are just other cost considerations. These are things that are still going on in the pre-planning stage of analyzing your current scenario. So I've included some key stakeholders that I recommend are important into understanding what your current environment is for multifunction devices, and then what solutions are we looking for in this next RFP opportunity. So I've included facilities. When we look at the elements of TCO and think about that pre-acquisition cost, facilities can provide a very good visibility into floor plan mapping or electrical outlets that are required. I said this before about using the TCO model to prevent financial surprises. So for example, the last thing you wanted to do is have a solution delivered only to find out that the electrical plug doesn't fit the electrical outlet that you have already installed. Or to remain competitive, vendors are always looking to up their game in technology, produce more efficient machines. The last thing you want to know or to learn is that you don't have the network infrastructures to support that new technology. So that's why I've also included IT. They also can provide some visibility of some of the in-house support costs that are associated. So with multifunction devices, what cost is currently occurring is consumable cost, your toner and your paper. End users provide visibility into your conversion cost of training education, how properly trained are your end users, and what's going to be required if you implement a new solution. And then your supply chain department can provide visibility on conversion cost, such as downtime cost and disposal cost. So when you're switching, if you decide to switch suppliers, where downtime cost is associated to it, like I said before, there's 2 steps to it. So once the machine is implemented, there's that downtime cost that impacts your end users of removing the current solution and getting that new machine implemented. And then there's that post-operation when if the machine breaks. And what is the cost that is incurred? When we think about hospitals, if we think about our nursing units that are critical units, what's the downtime cost if the machine goes down? And you have your nurse having to go out through the hospital trying to find a machine to either fax paperwork, scan consent forms, and then what does that do to your patient wait times? What is the impact it'll have ultimately on your patient revenue? Now the second step of your TCO process is to identify all potential cost drivers involved in the purchase of multifunction devices. So this step includes any cost-related activity and the elements of TCO, which are the acquisition cost, conversion cost, and disposal cost. So identifying the tip of the iceberg is typically pretty easy. You can easily go online on Google and find out what the cost of your hardware and software would be. And then from your vendor community, you can find out what freight charges are associated with that device. What's not so obvious are the cost drivers hidden beneath the waterline. What I pulled up now is a document to help you identify cost drivers. Now, please don't feel like you need to write all of this down. We will provide this document to all the attendees of today's webinar. Really, what I just want to show you is a tool that we use where we've tried to capture as many cost drivers that we can think of that would potentially be incurred on a different type of procurement. So where this isn't specific to a particular commodity, it does provide you with some cost drivers to think about. So it's a very good tool, and it's flexible to where you can add, delete, depending on what your procurement project is. And so what I've done with this tool is, if you look at the very top, is I've built it based on the elements of TCO. So it's going from the very beginning to the end of your cost. So using that document that I just showed, I actually used it to produce some of those hidden costs that would fall beneath the waterline. So some of the things that we need to consider as we go to procure multifunction devices is space allocation, which is typically a pre-acquisition cost. Multifunction devices are very large, so we want to make sure that we have current space allocated to those machines. There's a cost to operating and maintaining those machines when they go down. Consumable cost. Throughout its life cycle, department's budget will be affected with consumable cost, utilities and downtime, and then there's some other hidden costs below. So once you've identified your cost drivers, obtaining the cost impact of each activity is as important to complete the last steps of your TCO framework. Obtaining data has always been a challenge for supply chain, but if we're diligent and resourceful, we can get financial estimates to quantify our short and long-term expenses. In addition to our evaluation team's knowledge, vendors can be an ideal manner for obtaining information. During the RFP process, we can develop our statement of work and questionnaire to get detailed quantitative responses from suppliers. Now, I won't go into the steps of writing a scope of work, but asking the right questions about your current needs and cost drivers will provide you with the financial cost elements needed to build your TCO analysis. Now, going back to our sourcing opportunity, we now understand our end users' needs and have identified all the cost drivers. We've incorporated all the cost factors required to publish our RFP on the street. We go out to bid and find that there are 3 suppliers that can deliver the requirements of our end users. Under a traditional purchasing process, we would determine that supplier C provides the best value because it provides the lowest purchase price. However, what we've learned thus far is that purchase price is only the tip of the iceberg. So moving to award supplier C without analyzing all the cost drivers would really be a false victory, as you haven't taken into account the total cost impact of this decision. So really, in order to answer the question that we have been asked of which supplier provides the lowest cost of ownership, we need to go into the third step of your TCO framework, and that's conducting a comprehensive analysis of the real cost of our sourcing opportunity. Using the financial elements provided by each supplier, we can quickly take those amounts and plug it into a tool to compare cost. Now, I created a tool that I will share with everyone at the end of the webinar to capture all of your cost. And the tool is built out looking at the elements of TCO, where your costs are going to be incurred early on. So at the very beginning, the very top of this tool, you have your pre-acquisition cost. Well, I've put that it wouldn't apply to this particular solution because we already have multifunction devices currently installed. So we have the infrastructure to support any new solution. The next element of TCO is your acquisition cost. All of these costs would be incurred in your very first year. So I haven't placed it in year 1, 2, or 3. Additional cost drivers are maintenance and support. With any technology device that you buy, most manufacturers provide a 1-year guarantee. So if that machine goes down, they'll fix it at no charge. What we need to start capturing, though, is year 2 and 3. What impact is this going to have on the departments to keep this machine in operation if it breaks down? The other thing are consumable costs. These costs are going to be incurred day 1. And so why not include that into your TCO model so that your end users don't just see your purchase price, but understand what it's going to cost to maintain that equipment. And so I've included this in year 1, year 2, and 3 of the life cycle of multifunction devices. So as you go down, I didn't put input fees and taxes only for one reason. While we're only looking at a scenario currently at just purchase price, there is also other cost considerations or other scenarios that we need to vet or analyze using a TCO to really understand what your lowest cost of ownership is. So not only could we purchase multifunction devices, there's always a scenario where we could lease the machines. So which solution provides your lowest cost of ownership? Those are things that you would want to compare. For the purpose of this webinar, we're only going to look at purchase. So the last element of your TCO model is disposal cost. There isn't really a huge market for outdated machines, so we actually put this out as a loss. It would really cost the institution $50 for every multifunction device they have to remove and either send it off to a recycling center. Once you've analyzed all those cost drivers and looked at year 1, year 2, and 3, we can see that this particular supplier, the total cost of ownership after 3 years is almost $4,000. Unlike before, when we were looking at suppliers where we were only looking at purchase price, it was a little less than half of that. So this was what I had addressed before regarding your different scenarios. So since we're only going to go through purchase only, these are some of the other scenarios that you want to consider in order to really determine what your lowest cost of ownership is. So once you've plugged in all your information, we can really start to compare suppliers more accurately because now we've captured real cost. So now that we've included not just acquisition costs, but all of the other elements of TCO, we determined that supplier B, under a purchase-only scenario, provides the lowest cost of ownership. And if we think about the previous exercise where we were just looking under a traditional approach, where supplier C provided the lowest purchase price, they actually end up being the more expensive supplier over the 3 years of the multifunction device purchase. So benefits of using a TCO model in this particular sourcing opportunity is it not only uncovered the direct costs, but also the indirect costs for office printing. It identified the lowest cost of ownership. You're able to implement a best practice for office printing using the TCO model and then utilize your employee resources more efficiently. Some benefits of TCO to overall to your institution is that it provides a methodology for determining the full financial cost over time. It supports the assumption that the lowest acquisition price does not always realize the best results, It improves information flow, decision making, and our business process. Another bullet point is it obtains the lowest cost of ownership for end users, and then more importantly, the transparency of long-term cost impact. So like I said before, there are some challenges that come with the TCO model, but there are things that if we're diligent and resourceful, we can definitely overcome. One of the challenges of TCO is that it's resource intensive. The front end work that you put into research and planning can be extensive. However, using tools such as the ones that I went and presented to you, you can begin to add and delete so that it suits your procurement needs. They're very flexible to add and delete. Another challenge is data collection. It can, like I said before, it's always a challenge for supply chain to get data. But using resources such as the internet, our vendor community, your end users, current spend, can provide very good visibility onto what your costs are currently for your environment, and then what costs you are going to incur during the life cycle of an asset or service. Another challenge are competing TCO best practices and methodologies. So because every procurement is unique, and methods of TCO can vary. For example, some solutions maybe that have no competition, the TCO model would vary in that you probably wouldn't have pre-acquisition cost. You would maybe only focus on the last 3 elements of TCO. Another challenge is sometimes the optimal TCO decision is not always accepted. And what I mean by that, it's if we look at our solution for multifunction devices, where we selected supplier B as providing the lowest cost of ownership, but you present your findings to your institution and they come back to you and say, yeah, I see that supplier B provides the lowest cost of ownership, but I really like supplier A. It happens a lot in supply chain. What do you do with that challenge? And what really helps in that challenge is to really understand the benefits of TCO so that you can convey that to your end users. So if we think about our research community, if we really focus on maximizing savings through finding the lowest cost of ownership solution and explaining to them that this not only saves them money on the front end, but really stretches their research dollars, you may have more buy-in power. And then you can overcome that particular challenge. And then when do you apply TCO? Some examples that we have would be for large capital equipment. So for example, recently for the Strategic Services Group, we recently went out and put a bid for athletic equipment, where our end users are going to be making large capital investments for their fitness centers. We want to make sure that we can really present to them what their savings are going to be and what their costs are going to be over time. And the only way we were able to do this is by implementing a TCO model. Where this may not have been beneficial is, let's just say one of our institutions came to us and said, hey, our treadmill broke, could you help us with that? You may want to that may not be an example for you to use a complexity best practice like TCO. Another area where you can apply TCO are those that have complex life cycle cost. I don't know if anyone on my team has an example of that they could provide regarding life cycle cost, but really it's just looking at assets that have very complex operating and maintaining cost, or or just solutions that have various scenarios. So example, our multifunction devices, where there really wasn't just one option when you go out to procure multifunction devices. There were about 3 or 4 different other scenarios that we can look at to compare cost. Another is when it significantly impacts your end users. So when your decision will impact your entire community, or let's just say a large pool of your community, you're going to want to use a TCO model, not only to provide the lowest cost of ownership, but to really show transparency of what the initial cost is going to be, your operations, and what that cost is going to look like over time at the end of that purchase's life cycle. So again, when we're going out to compare suppliers on cost factors, keep TCO in the back of your mind. Using a TCO model is a best practice for determining lowest cost. You see TCO as always as a best practice in strategic sourcing. It examines all scenarios. So not only are you providing the lowest cost of ownership for the solution you're trying to procure, but you can see what it looks like if you were to, purchase versus lease. And then negotiate with your supplier. What I mean by that is the more knowledge you understand about the industry of the commodity you're trying to procure, the more power you have when you go to negotiate with suppliers. And then TCO validates your selection decisions when it comes to cost. So I hope this webinar provided you with a good overview of the basic concepts of TCO, that you leave with a method to identify cost drivers and apply the TCO cost elements to help you determine what the real cost of things you are buying.